you were in your early to mid 20s when you started SRS and literally started also distributing other movies at the same time. How did
Yeah.
that feel being somewhat of an auteur in the industry and people coming to you being like, "Hey, yeah, can you distribute mine too?" And you're like, "Wow, I'm literally just starting this." Right.
Yeah.
And and now people are coming to you as an authority. How did that make you feel?
Oh, geez, I haven't thought about that in so long. I'm not sure. I didn't think of myself as some like a leader or expert in the field. I was really learning as I went along. So a lot of it was like, sort of throwing it at the wall and seeing what sticks and
Sure.
constantly looking for opportunities because it really was sort of dog eat dog. And, I was coming in the VHS era. And it already had its run, so it was tailing off. When DVD hit, that was a bit of like a gold mine. I always call it like a gold rush because they were picking up anything, so it was great. That was like a really good time period because I could release anything, the stores would pick it up, we'd sell hundreds and thousands of copies, not hundreds and
Wow.
thousands, hundreds and or thousands of copies,
Understood.
but
Yeah.
at least always 1,000. And we'd get in some bigger outlets and stuff like that. And my process of learning was when something was successful was to stick with it, and a lot of stuff wasn't. For those guys to come to me, like I said, it would be like, oh well, I can save money. I think it was like Fan with a Video Scope was a place I'd advertise quite a bit. I could be like, oh, I'd put like 4 movies into this ad instead of one. That would save money, and we would all be reaching the same audience. And in turn, they would sell. And then I had certain outlets, I could run anything through with different levels of success. And then I would look for, like I said, openings. Like I remember getting into the A-Fest, which was a military account. They would sell to the stores on the military bases, and they would buy thousands of units. And, we'd run anywhere from 1 to 3 titles to them. So like when that door would open, I could definitely take advantage of it and exploit it and send them as many titles as possible. They were pretty picky though.
Yeah.
And
Well, what a distribution ability going through that. I mean, literally sending them thousands of copies, and then I
sure.
imagine they just spread everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So,
And I'm
well,
pretty sure they were one way, so I didn't have to worry about returns too much with them. I think so.
yeah,
Because that was like another problem. You could sometimes find a store who would take a bunch, but then you had to deal with the returns, which, um, um, it wasn't more than 50% of the stock ever, but it's still, even at like 25% would be a pretty big hit.
yeah,
And sometimes it was very small. But yeah, constantly like, I benefited from the internet. After I shot Vicious, when I went back from Ohio, after working on Sandman, I moved back with my parents while I shot Vicious Sweet, and so that saved me money. But as soon as I was done with Vicious Sweet, I moved out, and I was like, oh, I'm not even sure I'm going to make money on this. Even though I had the distribution in place, it wasn't like making a ton of money, with anything. It depended how fast you get product out. So if the product had been sitting for a while, nothing new, I'd been working on Vicious Sweet for a while, then, there wasn't a ton of income rolling in. But I quickly jumped on the internet and was like, how can I use this to sell stuff? And I saw that no one had a site that was dedicated to indie, like B movies of this level. There was one site who was selling Hollywood movies. He had a few B movies, but no one was dedicated to it. So I created a site that was dedicated to it, and I reached out to other companies and said, hey, can I list your product or buy your product wholesale? I don't know, even told them necessarily it was on the internet. And I benefited from the fact that a lot of them didn't jump on the internet for a few years, at least after me. So my
yeah.
site took off, and I was suddenly making like tons of money and more than enough to make a living and afford rent and live on my own, which became another avenue for the movies I was distributing. Now these were all movies I was acquiring. At that point I wasn't producing so much, even though I did produce Gut Pile. I was just handling basically my own stuff that I
Hmm.
was directing, and then signing rights, which would pay them a split of the profits. Sometimes there's an advance. I think back in those days there wasn't too many advances that I was paying out. I wasn't really in a good position to do that yet. But even then, I knew back then one of the key things I learned was artwork was key, and the artwork we created back then was horrible. It was so tough to find like a good graphic designer or a good artist, and these filmmakers never would take pictures, so we had to work off frame grabs of analog movies. Again, that was like another step of learning I could totally tangent off on that
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
we'll cover later.